The peaks of Sierra Nevada cut jagged silhouettes against a blood-red sunset. 6 men in tactical gear pressed against weathered rock faces, their ammunition pouches hanging empty, faces streaked with dirt and blood. Captain Ryan Reynolds clutched his radio knuckles white with tension. Static crackled through the line as he made one final desperate call. "Command, this is Eagle 6. We are surrounded, low on ammo, no extraction point." His voice dropped. "We need immediate support or we are not coming home." Only static answered him. 20 yards away, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Davis took a risky glance around a boulder and instantly jerked back as bullets chipped stone inches from his face. Fresh blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, mingling with older stains. "They've got high ground on all sides, Captain," he reported, voice steady despite their dire situation. "At least 40 hostiles, heavy weapons, military-grade thermal imaging." Reynolds nodded grimly. The mission brief had promised minimal resistance, a simple extraction of 3 American scientists held by local insurgents. Instead, they had walked into a meticulously planned ambush with overlapping fields of fire and enough firepower to hold off an entire battalion. "This wasn't militia," he muttered. "Someone knew we were coming." Nearby, Petty Officer James Walker clutched his side where a bullet had torn through his vest. Blood seeped between his fingers as Corpsman Riley worked frantically to stem the bleeding, the medical kit nearly depleted. "Hang on, buddy," Riley whispered. "Just hang on." A fresh barrage of gunfire sent everyone pressing deeper into what little cover remained. Reynolds looked at his men. Brothers he had trained with fought alongside men with families waiting back home. For the first time in 15 years of service, he allowed himself to think the unthinkable. None of them would make it out alive. Then it happened. A single shot echoed through the canyon, different from the others, deeper, heavier, from somewhere far beyond the ridgeline. The enemy commander, easily identifiable by his radio gear and the way others looked to him for orders, suddenly crumpled to the ground. A perfect shot through his tactical headset. Before anyone could process what had happened, 3 more shots followed in rapid succession, each finding a different target with devastating precision. The heavy machine gunner on the North Ridge, the spotter with thermal imaging equipment, the communications specialist with the satellite uplink. 4 impossible shots, 4 kills. The coordinated enemy attack faltered as confusion spread through their ranks. Then a woman's voice cut through the static on their emergency channel, cool, measured with absolute authority. Ghost Echo providing overwatch. Clear West Passage in 4 minutes. Davis and Reynolds exchanged stunned glances. "That's impossible," Davis whispered. "Is that?" Reynolds nodded slowly, his expression shifting from despair to cautious hope. Ghost Echo. Master Chief Colonel Matthew Hayes stood on the shooting range watching the new SEAL recruits fumble with their rifles. At 61, with silver hair cropped military short and deep lines etched around ice-blue eyes, he embodied the living history of naval special warfare. 38 years of service had left its mark: the slight limp from Fallujah, the burn scars on his right forearm, and the perpetual alertness that never left his gaze. "Jenkins, your breathing is all wrong," he called out, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned authority. "You're anticipating the recoil. Stop fighting the rifle." The young SEAL adjusted his stance, took a breath, and squeezed the trigger. The shot landed closer to center. "Better." Hayes nodded, checking his watch. 3 weeks until retirement. 3 weeks until he handed over the reins to a younger generation. He wasn't sure if he was ready. As the recruits filed off the range, Hayes's attention drifted to the armory building at the far end of the compound. For 3 weeks now, he'd been watching the new weapons maintenance specialist, the quiet woman who kept to herself, who seemed to know more about precision rifles than anyone he'd ever met. Alexandra "Alex" Caldwell. 35 years old, chestnut hair, always pulled back in a tight bun, slim build, no more than 5'4". Those eyes perpetually hidden behind dark aviators, even inside the dimly lit armory. On paper, she was unremarkable. Weapons maintenance tech, former Army honorable discharge, no combat deployments listed, no special qualifications beyond standard armorer certifications. But Matthew Hayes hadn't survived. This is about 4 decades in special operations by taking things at face value. The way she handled weapons spoke of experience far beyond her official record. The armory door was propped open against the summer heat. Inside, rifle components lay in precise rows on steel workbenches. The smell of gun oil and solvent hung in the air. Alex stood with her back to the door, her hands moving with surgical precision as she disassembled an M40A5 sniper rifle, the Marine Corps standard-issue precision weapon. Hayes paused in the doorway, observing silently. Her movements weren't just practiced, they were instinctive. The way her fingers traced the barrel, checking for imperfections invisible to the naked eye. The methodical way she tested the trigger assembly, making micro-adjustments without hesitation. "That's Wilson's rifle," Hayes said, stepping into the room. He claimed the grouping was off at 800 meters. Alex didn't startle at his voice, didn't even look up. "It wasn't the rifle," she said quietly, her voice carrying a slight rasp. "It's his breathing. He exhales too hard before the shot." Her fingers continued working, adjusting the harmonic tuner with precision that bordered on artistry. "But I'm fixing the barrel harmonics anyway. It'll compensate for his flaw." Hayes leaned against the workbench. "You can tell that just by looking at his groups." The faintest smile touched her lips. "I can tell by how the carbon built up in the barrel. Inconsistent pressure patterns." She finally glanced up, though her eyes remained hidden behind those impenetrable shades. "He's also carrying tension in his right shoulder. It's affecting his follow-through." Hayes's interest deepened. "You watch the shooters." "I watch everything," she replied simply, then returned to her work. That evening, Hayes sat in his sparsely furnished quarters, a glass of bourbon on the desk beside him, Alex Caldwell's service record open on his computer. 8 years Army, stationed primarily at Fort Benning, weapons specialist, honorable discharge as a staff sergeant. Nothing to explain the way she handled weapons like they were extensions of her body, or how she could diagnose shooting problems without ever watching the shooter. His phone buzzed with a text from Lieutenant Commander Mason, the base's executive officer. "She's at it again. Range 4, you might want to see this." Hayes pulled on his jacket and stepped into the Montana night. The temperature had dropped, his breath forming clouds in the crisp mountain air. Range 4 was the farthest from the main compound, used exclusively for long-distance shooting drills. Mason waited in the shadows of the observation post. "How long?" Hayes asked quietly. 40 minutes, Mason replied, handing him a night vision monocular. "Watch." Through the green-tinted lens, Hayes could see Alex prone on the firing platform. No standard-issue rifle this time. Instead, she was working with something he didn't recognize. Longer barrel, custom stock, not military issue. She lay perfectly still, only her breath causing the slightest movement. Then, with no discernible change in her posture, she fired. Hayes tracked to the target area. Metal silhouettes positioned at varying distances. The farthest one, barely visible, even with night vision, tipped backward with the impact. 2,000 meters, Mason whispered. "No wind calls, no spotter. First round hit. She's done it 6 times now. Different targets, same result." Hayes lowered the monocular, skepticism battling with what he'd just witnessed. "That's not possible." "Tell that to the targets." They watched as Alex methodically worked through what appeared to be a practiced routine. Each shot, regardless of distance or angle, found its mark with unerring precision. No hesitation, no adjustments between shots, just steady, methodical execution. She was accounting for wind drift, bullet drop, the Coriolis effect. All the complex ballistic calculations that make extreme long-range shooting one of the most technically demanding skills in warfare. "Who the hell is she, Hayes?" Mason asked quietly. Hayes shook his head. "I don't know, but I'm going to find out." 3 days later, Hayes was in Alex's workshop retrieving a dropped firing pin spring that had rolled under a cabinet. His fingers brushed against something else, something that didn't belong. He pulled it out and held it up to the light, a spent rifle cartridge, unlike any standard issue ammunition. The brass was unmarked except for a small engraving near the rim, GE7. He pocketed it without a word. That night, Hayes called an old friend, Captain James Sullivan, now working at Naval Intelligence in Washington. "I need you to look into something, Jim, off the books." "Retirement's 3 weeks away, Hayes." Sullivan sighed, though his tone indicated he was already listening. "What am I looking for? Ghost Echo and anything connected to a designation GE7. The line went silent for a long moment. "Where did you hear that name?" Sullivan finally asked, his voice noticeably tighter. "Found it on a shell casing." Another pause. "I'll call you back." It took 4 days. When Sullivan finally called, his voice was hushed despite being on a secure line. "I'm sending you coordinates. No phones, no electronics. Be there tomorrow at 1400. The coordinates led to a fishing spot on the Yellowstone River, 3 hours from Thunderhawk. Sullivan was already there, a fly rod in hand, though he made no effort to actually fish. At 68, he looked older than Hayes remembered. The price of too many secrets kept too long. Ghost Echo was a CIA black program, Sullivan said without preamble, scanning their surroundings as he spoke. Started in the early 90s. Officially, it never existed. He handed Hayes a sealed envelope. What I could find is in there. It isn't much. Most files were either destroyed or buried so deep even my clearance couldn't touch them. Hayes weighed the envelope in his hand. What were they? Sullivan cast his line into the river. His movements practiced, but his attention clearly elsewhere. The best way I can describe them, guardian angels with sniper rifles. He reeled in slowly. When operations went sideways, when teams were compromised beyond hope of conventional rescue, Ghost Echo deployed. One shooter, no support team beyond any reasonable operational range. Sounds like a suicide mission. Usually was. They'd drop in miles from the target, navigate hostile territory alone, set up in impossible positions, and execute shots no one had any business making. Sullivan's voice dropped lower. Distance records that officially still don't exist. Rescue operations that never made it into any report. Hayes thought of the shell casing. GE-7, Ghost Echo Operative 7. I'm guessing the program never had more than 10 active operatives at any time. Sullivan's expression darkened. Most didn't last long. Either the missions killed them or what, Jim, or the agency did when they knew too much, or when the program shifted direction. He met Hayes' gaze directly. Ghost Echo operatives had the highest security clearance outside the Joint Chiefs. They saw everything new where all the bodies were buried. You think Caldwell was one of them? Sullivan began breaking down his rod. I think you should tread very carefully, Morgan. There's only one Ghost Echo operative who was ever rumored to have gotten out alive, a woman. They called her Sentinel. Why Sentinel? Because she watched over teams like a guardian, covered their exfil when everything went to hell. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. But here's the thing. If she's who you think she is, and if she's hiding at Thunderhawk, she's running from something or someone, and they might still be looking for her. Hayes returned to base with more questions than answers. The envelope contained only fragments, heavily redacted operation reports, vague references to Overwatch support that materialized in impossible situations, a list of dates and locations spanning nearly 2 decades of black operations. One particular incident stood out: Sierra Nevada, 1991, an operation involving SEAL Team 8 that went catastrophically wrong, only to be salvaged by what the after-action report cryptically called independent supporting fire. For the next week, Hayes watched Alex more carefully. He noted how she always positioned herself with clear sight lines to exits, how she could identify approaching vehicles by engine sound alone, how she instinctively calculated distances with small eye movements that most wouldn't notice. On Friday afternoon, Hayes made the 3-hour drive to Whitefish, Montana, where a former commander lived in semi-seclusion. Jack Harmon, 70 years old, had retired from the Navy 15 years earlier after a distinguished career in special operations. Now he raised horses on a sprawling ranch, seemingly content in his isolation. Harmon met Hayes on the porch, 2 glasses of whiskey already poured. The older man's weathered face broke into a smile as they shook hands, but his eyes remained watchful, assessing. Hayes, been a long time. Too long, sir. They settled into chairs overlooking the pasture, making small talk about mutual acquaintances and the state of the service. Finally, Harmon set down his glass. You didn't drive 3 hours to reminisce about the old days. What's on your mind? Hayes took a breath. Ghost Echo. The change was immediate. Harmon's posture stiffened, the easy smile vanishing from his face. Where did you hear that name? Hayes explained about Alex, the shell casing, his conversation with Sullivan. As he spoke, Harmon's expression grew increasingly grim. I only encountered them once, Harmon said, his voice low. Kandahar, 2002. My team was pinned down, no extract possible. Command had written us off. He turned back to Hayes, his eyes distant with memory. Then this voice comes over the emergency channel, calm as can be, telling us to prepare for extract in exactly 8 minutes. Sentinel, Hayes said quietly. Harmon nodded. Never saw her, just heard the shots. 7 of them, each one taking out a critical enemy position, created just enough chaos for us to break contact and reach the extraction point. He shook his head in disbelief even after all these years. The shots came from a ridgeline over 3 kilometers away. Winds gusting to 30 knots. Nighttime. The kind of shooting that defies the laws of physics. Did you ever find out who she was? No. When I tried to follow up, I hit classified roadblocks at every turn. Harmon leaned closer. But I made it my business to learn what I could. Ghost Echo wasn't just a tactical asset. They were insurance. Insurance against operational failures, against missions that violated international law. Harmon's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Against the kind of black operations that powerful people would kill to keep secret. He gripped Hayes' arm with surprising strength. If she's at your base, Hayes, if she's chosen that place to hide, keep it to yourself. Tell no one. His eyes bored into Hayes'. Because if she's really there, if she's really who we think she is, they're still hunting her. The drive back to Thunderhawk gave Hayes plenty of time to think. By the time he arrived, night had fallen, a new moon leaving the Montana sky awash with stars. Instead of heading to his quarters, he drove past the main gate, following a narrow access road that wound higher into the mountains. Intelligence gathering wasn't just about official channels. Over the past week, he'd pieced together snippets of information from the base's logistics officer, fuel receipts, supply requests, power usage patterns, all pointing to regular activity at one of the abandoned observation posts 3 miles north of the main compound. The road ended at a locked gate. Hayes continued on foot, moving silently through the pine forest. 20 minutes later, he spotted it, a small cabin nestled against the mountainside, a thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. He found a concealed position with a clear view of the cabin and settled in to wait. Hours passed. The mountain cold seeped into his bones, but Hayes remained motionless, patience forged through decades of operations. Just before dawn, the cabin door opened. Alex emerged dressed in dark tactical clothing that wasn't standard issue for any branch of service he recognized. She moved with fluid efficiency, loading equipment into a weathered Jeep parked nearby. Hayes adjusted his position for a better view and froze as his boot dislodged a small stone. The sound was minimal, barely audible even to his own ears at this distance. But Alex's head snapped up instantly, her posture shifting from casual to combat-ready in a heartbeat. She scanned the tree line, her gaze passing over his position once, twice. Then she relaxed slightly, though her movements took on an added alertness as she finished loading the vehicle and drove away, following a barely visible trail that led deeper into the mountains. Hayes waited 15 minutes, then approached the cabin. The lock on the door was sophisticated, not something you'd find at a typical hunting lodge. It took him several minutes to bypass it. Inside the cabin was Spartan but meticulously organized. A wood stove in one corner, a narrow bed neatly made with military precision, a desk with topographical maps of the surrounding 50 miles marked with notations in a shorthand he didn't recognize. What caught his attention was the gun cabinet against the far wall. Unlike the electronically secured weapon storage at Thunderhawk, this was secured with an old-fashioned combination lock. Hayes examined it without touching, noting the quality and precision of the mechanism. On the wall beside it hung an array of equipment, a ghillie suit, unlike any standard issue model, custom modified to match the specific terrain of the Northern Rockies. Communication gear that looked military but lacked any service markings. Hayes was about to leave when he noticed something odd about the cabin floor, a slight unevenness in the wooden planks near the bed. He knelt down, running his fingers along the seam until he found the hidden latch. The concealed compartment contained a metal box with a collection of items that told their own story. Identification cards with Alex's photo, but different names, various currency from at least 8 different countries, a satellite phone unlike any standard issue, and photographs. A team of 6 people in nondescript tactical gear, faces partially obscured, standing before a helicopter with no identifying markings. In one final image, Alex, younger by perhaps 10 years, standing next to a distinguished-looking man in a suit. The man's face had been carefully cut from the photo. Hayes heard it just in time. The faint crunch of tires on gravel outside. He quickly replaced everything exactly as he'd found it, secured the hidden compartment, and moved to the rear of the cabin. The small bathroom window offered a tight but manageable exit. He was 50 yards into the tree line when the Jeep returned. Moving carefully through the underbrush, Hayes began making his way back toward the access road. The bullet struck a tree trunk 6 inches from his head, with no warning, no sound of a shot, just a sudden impact sending bark fragments spraying across his face. Hayes dropped instantly, rolling behind cover, reaching for a sidearm he wasn't carrying. "That was a warning," Alex's voice called from somewhere to his left. "The next one won't be." Hayes stayed perfectly still, calculating options. She had the high ground the weapon and apparently knowledge of his presence all along. "I'm coming out," he called slowly, rising to his feet, hands raised. "I'm unarmed." He stepped into a small clearing, scanning for her position. Nothing. "You've been watching me for weeks," her voice came again, seemingly from everywhere and nowhere. "Following me, asking questions." "Yes," Hayes admitted, seeing no point in denial. "Why?" "Because you don't belong at Thunderhawk. Your skills don't match your background. You know too much about things a weapons tech shouldn't know." Silence stretched between them. Then a rustle of movement from his right. Alex stepped into view, a rifle held casually but competently in her hands, not pointed at him, but ready to be if necessary. "Who sent you?" she asked, her voice flat. "No one, she. This was my own initiative." "You spoke with Sullivan and Harmon." The revelation that she knew about those conversations sent a chill through Hayes. "How did you?" "I have my sources just like you have yours." She studied him, her expression unreadable behind those ever-present sunglasses. "What do you think you know, Master Chief?" "I know you're a Ghost Echo, Operative 7. I know they called you Sentinel." If she was surprised by his knowledge, she didn't show it. "And now what you report me, turn me into who, according to every official record, Ghost Echo never existed." The faintest smile touched her lips. "Smart man." A sound drew both their attention. A vehicle on the access road, still distant but approaching. Alex's posture changed instantly, the casual stance replaced by combat readiness. "Did you tell anyone else you were coming near?" "No." She assessed him briefly, then made a decision. "There's a ravine 30 yards north. Take cover there. Don't move until I call for you." "What's happening?" But she was already moving, rifle raised, heading toward the sound with a predator's silent grace. Hayes followed her instructions, finding the ravine and settling into a concealed position with a partial view of the access road. Minutes later, a black SUV with tinted windows and no license plates came into view, moving slowly along the rough track. It stopped 100 yards from the cabin. Two men emerged, both wearing tactical gear without insignia, both carrying suppressed rifles that weren't standard military issue. They moved with the practiced efficiency of experienced operators, taking up positions with clear fields of fire toward the cabin. Hayes's combat instincts screamed danger. These weren't friendlies. A single shot broke the mountain silence. Not the sharp crack of a high-powered rifle, but the muted thump of a suppressed weapon. One of the men crumpled instantly, a perfect headshot from extreme range. The second man dove for cover, scanning frantically for the shooter. He keyed his radio, mouth moving urgently. Then another shot, another precision hit. The man collapsed beside the vehicle. Silence descended once more on the mountain. "Clear," Alex's voice called out several minutes later. Hayes emerged from the ravine to find her already examining the bodies with clinical detachment. She had removed their tactical vests and was going through their equipment. "Who are they?" he asked. "Cleanup crew," she replied without looking up. "Professional hit team." "And they were here for you." She nodded, pocketing a satellite phone from one of the bodies. "They've been tracking me for weeks. I knew they'd make a move soon." She glanced up at him. "Just didn't expect them today." "How did you know they were coming?" "I didn't, not specifically." She finally looked up at him. "But I knew someone had been in my cabin. Set up a perimeter alarm when I left. Came back to check it, found you." A grim smile touched her lips. "Then found them following you." The implication hit Hayes hard. "I led them right to you." "Not intentionally," she replied with a shrug, "but it's why I don't trust anyone. Why I keep to myself." 2 hours later, the bodies and vehicle were gone, hidden in a mine shaft deep in the mountains. Hayes and Alex sat in her cabin, a fire crackling in the wood stove, coffee mugs steaming between them. Outside, snow had begun to fall, unusual for early September, even in Montana. Alex had finally removed her sunglasses. Without them, her face seemed both younger and impossibly older. the smooth skin contrasting with eyes that carried decades more experience than should have been possible. "I know your record," she said, breaking the silence. "Iraq, Afghanistan, Fallujah, Kandahar, Helmand Province. Bronze Star with Valor. Purple Heart, 26 confirmed kills as a SEAL sniper." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "My record is classified." "So is mine." She took a sip of coffee. Ghost Equity was formed in 1989, officially a CIA asset deployment program, unofficially a specialized unit of solo operators trained for missions beyond conventional parameters. "Solo snipers," Hayes clarified. She nodded. "We were ghosts. No official connection to any military branch or intelligence agency. No extraction plans. No support teams." Her fingers traced the rim of her mug. "If we succeeded, we made our own way out. If we failed, you were disavowed. We never existed in the first place." Hayes leaned forward. "How many?" 23 over the program's existence. Never more than 10 active at once. A shadow crossed her face. "Most didn't survive their third deployment." "But you did." Her eyes met his. "I completed 47 deployments over 12 years. The number was staggering for special operations. Even 4 or 5 high-risk deployments in a career was considered exceptional." "Sierra Nevada, 1991, Hayes said. "SEAL Team 8, that was you." Something flickered in her expression. Recognition, perhaps even surprise. "That was my first official mission as Sentinel. I'd been with the program for 18 months training mostly. They weren't sure I was ready for field deployment." "What happened?" "SEAL team walking into an ambush. Conventional support assets grounded due to weather. Command had written them off." Her voice became distant, reciting facts without emotion. "I was inserted 30 kilometers away, traversed mountain terrain solo, established an overwatch position beyond recommended operational distance, and eliminated the primary threats." She shrugged slightly. "Created an extraction corridor. Neutralized command elements in heavy weapons positions." The official report mentioned nothing about sniper support. Official reports rarely did. Ghost Echo operated in the spaces between documentation. Hayes studied her carefully. "Sierra Nevada, 1991. The shots you took to save that SEAL team. What was the distance?" A faint smile touched her lips. "The operational report listed 600 meters. And the actual distance, 2 to 740 meters. Crosswind at 24 knots. Temperature gradient of 30 degrees between my position and the target." Hayes nodded slowly. It was an impossible shot by any conventional standard, well beyond what even the most elite military snipers would attempt. "If I help you," he said finally, "I need to know one thing." "What's that?" He turned to face her. "The real reason you became Ghost Echo. Not the recruitment story, not the skills assessment. The real reason." Alex's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes, surprised perhaps that he would ask this particular question. "Because I needed to matter," she said simply, "to make a difference in a world that had taken everything from me." "What did they take?" She was silent for a long moment, then walked to the hidden compartment in the floor and removed a small photograph worn at the edges from handling. She handed it to him without a word. The photo showed a younger Alex, perhaps 20, standing beside an older man in army dress uniform. Between them, a teenage boy in a wheelchair, all three smiling despite the hospital setting visible in the background. "My father and brother," she said quietly. "Dad was Army intelligence. Marcus was 16, planning to enlist when he turned 18. "What happened to them?" "Officially car accident 1996. Her voice remained steady, but her eyes betrayed the pain. "Unofficially, they knew something they shouldn't about operations in Bosnia that violated direct congressional prohibitions." "The committee," Hayes said, remembering Sullivan's warnings. She nodded once. "I didn't know that then. Just knew that the accident report didn't add up. Brake lines that failed exactly when they were driving along a mountain road. No witnesses. Investigation closed in record time. So you enlisted looking for answers. Found my way into Army marksmanship unit instead. Turned out I had a natural talent." A bitter smile crossed her face. "Talented enough to draw attention from recruiters I didn't know existed." Ghost Echo. "They offered what I wanted most. Access to information no one else could reach. Deployment to places where answers might be found. She took the photo back, handling it with gentle reverence. By the time I realized who was really behind my family's death, I was already too deep. Hayes made his decision. I need to get back to base, maintain normal operations, act as if nothing has happened. He rose to his feet, and then I start looking for connections, whatever links Thunderhawk to this committee and their operations. Alex studied him, assessing his sincerity. Why would you risk your career, your life, based on what I've told you? You have no proof that any of this is true. Hayes moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the latch. Sierra Nevada, 1991. I was there. Her eyes widened slightly. Junior officer, first deployment. He met her gaze steadily. I never saw who took those shots. Never knew who saved us that day. But I've spent 30 years wondering. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You owe me nothing, Master Chief. I owe you everything, he corrected quietly. My life, the lives of my team, the family I came home to. He opened the door, the cold mountain air rushing in. I'll be in touch. Same time tomorrow. As Hayes drove back toward Thunderhawk, the rising sun breaking through the dissipating storm clouds, his mind raced with everything he'd learned. Ghost Echo, the committee, Sentinel operations spanning decades, conspiracies reaching to the highest levels of government. And at the center of it all, a woman whose life had been defined by loss, by duty, by a quest for justice that had consumed her for 14 years. If she was right, if even half of what she claimed was true, then the threat was real and closer than he'd ever imagined. His phone buzzed with a text message from Lieutenant Commander Mason. Where have you been, Hayes? Looking for you. Something big happening. All senior staff meeting at 0900. Hayes checked his watch. 2 hours to prepare himself, to hide everything he had just learned, to begin the most important undercover operation of his career. At the Thunderhawk gates, the guards waved him through with standard salutes. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary, but now with new eyes, Hayes noticed details he'd overlooked before. The extra security cameras installed last month, the new communications array on the administrative building, the unfamiliar personnel moving with just a little too much purpose through the compound. Something was happening at Thunderhawk, something connected to a conspiracy that had already claimed dozens of lives, and he was now at the center of it all. The briefing room at Thunderhawk hummed with tension as Hayes slipped into a seat along the back wall. 8 senior officers had gathered around the long table, faces grim in the harsh fluorescent light. At the head stood Colonel William Blackwood, the facility's commanding officer, a trim, imposing figure of 58 with the calculated stillness of someone accustomed to controlling rooms without visible effort. His military bearing was undercut by subtle tells, mannerisms that spoke of years spent outside the conventional chain of command. CIA Hayes thought, noting the way Blackwood's eyes swept the room, missing nothing. Gentlemen, Blackwood began, his voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to unquestioned obedience. As of 0600 this morning, Thunderhawk has been designated as the command center for Operation Granite Shield. The projection screen behind him flickered to life, displaying a classified mission brief. Hayes kept his expression neutral, despite the chill that ran down his spine. For the next 30 days, we'll be hosting specialized personnel in various agencies. Our primary mission is to provide logistical support and operational security for their deployment phase. Lieutenant Commander Mason raised a hand. What exactly are these specialized personnel deploying for, sir? Blackwood's eyes narrowed slightly. That information is compartmentalized, Commander. Our job is to provide the platform, not question the mission. Hayes studied the faces around the table. Most accepted this non-answer with military stoicism, but he noticed Mason and the base's medical officer, Captain Williams, exchange brief glances. They weren't the only ones with questions. Quarters in the East Wing have been prepared for our guests. They arrive tomorrow at 0800. Until then, I want enhanced security protocols across the entire facility. No unauthorized personnel beyond the main compound. All training exercises suspended. All leave requests denied. Blackwood paused, scanning the room. One more thing. Effective immediately, all communications go through our new secure network. The existing channels may be compromised. Hayes felt a weight settle in his stomach. If communications were being rerouted, Alex's ability to monitor them would be cut off. She'd be working blind. As the meeting concluded, Blackwood called out, "Master Chief Hayes." Hayes approached the front of the room, maintaining the steady demeanor that had served him through decades of high-pressure situations. Blackwood waited until the others had filed out before speaking. "Where were you this morning, Hayes?" "Supply run to Helena, sir," Hayes replied smoothly. "We're short on specialized ammunition for the Barrett rifles. Decided to handle it personally." Blackwood studied him, eyes searching for any flicker of deception. "At 0500, best time to beat the mountain traffic, sir." A thin smile crossed Blackwood's face. "Always the early riser, Hayes. That's why I've always valued you on this base." He gathered his papers from the table. "I'm assigning you as liaison to our incoming guests. Your experience will be valuable in making sure they have what they need." "Of course, sir." "One more thing," Blackwood's voice dropped. "There have been reports of unusual activity in the northern observation sector. Know anything about that?" Hayes met his gaze steadily. "No, sir, I'll look into it." "Do that." Blackwood nodded dismissal. And Hayes, "Sometimes old soldiers have a hard time adjusting to new priorities. Don't let your historical perspectives cloud your judgment." The warning was clear if veiled. Hayes nodded and left the room, mind racing beneath his calm exterior. The base was being positioned for something significant, something Blackwood knew more about than he was sharing. And somehow Hayes was already under suspicion. 6 black suburban SUVs arrived precisely at 0800 the next day, followed by 2 unmarked cargo trucks. Men and women in civilian clothes, but with unmistakable military bearing, emerged efficiently unloading equipment under the watchful eye of Colonel Blackwood. Hayes observed from his position near the main building, officially there to assist but primarily gathering intelligence. He counted 17 new arrivals, noting their movements, their groupings, the deference patterns that revealed their hierarchy. One man stood out, tall, silver-haired, with the confident posture of someone accustomed to authority. Dr. Alexei Volkov, according to the clipboard Hayes had been given, listed as scientific advisor. The others subtly oriented themselves around him, even those who appeared to be security personnel. "Master Chief Hayes," Colonel Blackwood called, gesturing him over. "This is Dr. Volkov. He'll be overseeing the technical aspects of Granite Shield. The doctor has specific requirements for the East Wing facilities." Hayes nodded professionally. "Of course, sir. We've prepared the area according to specifications." Volkov studied Hayes with clinical detachment. His accent was faint but detectable. Eastern Europeans softened by decades in America. "You were in Afghanistan." "Yes, sir. Helmand Province, 2005, among other deployments." "Fascinating region. Unique demographic patterns." Something in the way he said population variables sent a chill through Hayes. "I studied the population variables there extensively." This wasn't a doctor who saw people. This was a scientist who saw data points. "I'll need to inspect the ventilation systems," Volkov continued, "particularly the outflow channels that connect to the exterior circulation." "I'll arrange that immediately," Hayes replied, filing away this request. Ventilation systems, outflow channels. The implications were disturbing. For the next several hours, Hayes shadowed Volkov and his team, watching as they transformed the East Wing. Equipment was assembled behind closed doors with biohazard symbols prominently displayed. Advanced air filtration systems were installed alongside what appeared to be atmospheric monitoring equipment. Most concerning were the specialized containment units, designed not to keep something out, but to carefully control what got in. During a rare moment alone, Hayes slipped into the server room under the pretense of checking network connectivity for the new arrivals. The small device Alex had given him took exactly 30 seconds to install, just as she'd promised. He was out and back to his duties before anyone noticed his absence. That evening, as Hayes was finishing his inspection of the perimeter security, Lieutenant Commander Mason approached. "Something's not right about all this, Hayes," Mason said quietly, falling into step beside him. "Have you seen what they're setting up in Laboratory 3 biohazard containment protocols, atmospheric monitoring equipment?" Hayes glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Could be standard precautions for research materials." "Research on what? This is a training facility, not CDC headquarters." Mason's voice was tense. "And I overheard 2 of them discussing population centers within a 50-mile radius, talking about prevailing wind patterns." Hayes felt his suspicions hardening into certainty. "Keep your observations to yourself for now, Commander, but keep making them." "You know something," Mason said, studying him. "What is it?" "Not here," Hayes replied. Meet me at the shooting range tomorrow. 0600. We'll talk then. Mason nodded and moved away, his posture betraying his unease. Hayes watched him go, weighing the risk of bringing another person into this dangerous circle of knowledge. But he needed allies inside the base, especially with communications being monitored. At 2200 hours, Hayes drove to the rendezvous point, an aging roadside diner 15 miles east of Thunderhawk. The flickering neon sign and half-empty parking lot made it perfect. Anonymous, unremarkable. He took a booth in the back corner, ordered coffee, and waited. At precisely 1930 hours, Alex slid into the seat across from him. She wore civilian clothes, jeans, flannel shirt, work boots, with a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes. Nothing about her appearance would draw attention in rural Montana. "You weren't followed?" she asked quietly. "No, but communications at the base are being rerouted through a new secure network as of tomorrow morning." She nodded, unsurprised. "They're preparing for the next phase." "Operation Granite Shield," Hayes said, "officially launching tomorrow. Specialized personnel arriving from various agencies. No details on their actual mission." "Phoenix Revival," Alex confirmed. "Different name, same operation." The waitress approached. They paused, ordered food neither of them wanted, waited until she moved out of earshot. "What exactly is Phoenix Revival?" Hayes asked. "You mentioned biological agents, but what's the actual goal?" Alex leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "From what I've pieced together, it's a field test of a targeted pathogen. Something designed to affect specific demographic groups based on genetic markers." "That's impossible." "It was impossible 10 years ago." Her eyes held his. "But the committee has been funding Black research programs at facilities that don't officially exist, using scientists on whose work was too controversial for conventional channels." Hayes processed this decades of operational experience, helping him separate the plausible from the paranoid. "Why Thunderhawk? We're a training facility, not a research center." "Location, isolation, deniability." Alex counted off on her fingers. "But most importantly, Thunderhawk sits on federal land that borders 3 rural counties with ideal demographic patterns for their test. You're suggesting they plan to release this pathogen against American civilians?" Hayes kept his voice low, but couldn't hide his skepticism. "That crosses a line that even the darkest operations wouldn't touch." "The committee doesn't recognize lines, Hayes. They erase them." Alex's expression hardened. "Look at what they did to Ghost Echo. To my family. They believe they serve a higher purpose that justifies any action." Their food arrived. They ate mechanically, maintaining the appearance of a normal dinner, while continuing their conversation in measured tones. "I need access to the base's secure server room," Alex said finally. "If we can tap into their new communications network, we can track exactly what they're planning. Security's being enhanced as we speak. Getting you inside would be nearly impossible." "Not me, you." She slid a small device across the table, no larger than a USB drive. "This will create a back door into their system. 30 seconds to install. Undetectable to standard security sweeps." Hayes didn't touch it. "That's treason, Alex." "Is it, or is stopping an illegal operation against American citizens the highest form of patriotism?" Her eyes held his. "I'm not asking you to believe everything I've told you. I'm asking you to keep your eyes open, to gather information, then make your own judgment." Hayes considered his options. 38 years of service had taught him to trust the chain of command, but also to recognize when something was fundamentally wrong. The secrecy surrounding Granite Shield Blackwood's veiled warning, the specialized personnel arriving without explanation. He took the device, pocketing it smoothly. "I'll see what I can find out, but I need something from you first." "What?" "Proof, something concrete that ties the committee to illegal operations. Something beyond your word." Alex seemed to have expected this. She reached into her jacket and withdrew a folded document, sliding it across the table. "Operation Blackbriar, Somalia, 2003. A village of 37 civilians eliminated because they witnessed a rendition operation that never officially happened." Hayes unfolded the paper. It was a mission debrief on CIA letterhead. Details, dates, authorization codes, and a list of casualties classified as collateral elimination necessities. At the bottom, 3 signatures. One of them belonged to Colonel William Blackwood. "He was CIA before taking command of Thunderhawk," Alex said quietly. "One of the committee's most trusted assets." Hayes carefully refolded the document, a cold certainty settling in his gut. I'll contact you tomorrow night. Same method, different location. Before he rose to leave, Hayes noticed Alex's eyes lingering on him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Concern, perhaps, or something deeper. Be careful, Hayes, she said, her voice softer than he'd heard before. These people, they don't just kill their enemies. They erase them completely. Their eyes met across the table, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Two warriors who had spent their lives in the shadows now facing a common threat. I've operated behind enemy lines before, he said, rising from the table. Not like this, she replied, this worry in her voice unmistakable. Not against an enemy who knows you, who has access to every aspect of your life, who can turn your own people against you. Hayes nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. As he walked to his vehicle, he realized she was right. In his past operations, he had always known who the enemy was. Now he wasn't sure who to trust, except ironically, a ghost from his past who had appeared out of nowhere with a story that strained credibility. Yet that document with Blackwood's signature felt undeniably real in his pocket. Too real to ignore. The next morning, Hayes found himself escorting Volkov through the East Wing laboratories. The doctor moved from station to station, inspecting equipment, reviewing data on computer screens, occasionally making notations in a small, leather-bound notebook. Your facilities are adequate, Volkov commented, his tone suggesting he was being generous. The isolation parameters meet our requirements. Glad to hear it, sir, Hayes replied, watching as a technician calibrated what appeared to be an advanced aerosol dispersion system. May I ask what type of research you're conducting? Volkov's eyes flicked to him, calculating. Protective countermeasures, Master Chief, against evolving biological threats. A thin smile. Nothing more. The tour continued, each new room revealing more disturbing equipment, environmental simulation chambers, genetic sequencing stations, and most alarmingly, a sealed room with what appeared to be animal testing facilities. When Volkov was distracted with one of his team members, Hayes seized the opportunity. He slipped away, making his way quickly to the server room. The hallway was clear, a stroke of luck. He entered, moving directly to the main server bank. The device Alex had given him slid perfectly into an auxiliary port on the back of the primary server. 30 seconds. That's all he needed. 25 seconds and the door opened. Hayes straightened, adopting the casual posture of someone performing routine maintenance. Connectivity issues with the new systems, he explained to the technician who entered. The young man nodded, seemingly unconcerned, and moved to a different terminal. Hayes counted down the final seconds in his head, then casually reached behind the server, retrieved the device, and pocketed it. All set, he said, nodding to the technician as he left. He'd made it halfway down the corridor when a voice stopped him cold. Master Chief Hayes? Blackwood stood there, flanked by two security personnel. A moment of your time. Hayes followed them to Blackwood's office, his mind rapidly calculating scenarios, escape routes, explanations. None of them good. Blackwood closed the door behind them. I've known you a long time, Hayes. Respected your service record, your dedication. He leaned forward across his desk. So I'm going to ask you directly, and I expect an honest answer. Have you been in contact with Alexandra Caldwell regarding Operation Granite Shield? The mention of Alex's full name confirmed Hayes's worst fears. They knew everything, or at least far more than he had anticipated. Sir, I'm not familiar with that operation's details beyond what you've shared with senior staff. That's not what I asked, Master Chief. No, sir, it's not. Tension filled the room, the unspoken challenge hanging between them. Then Blackwood pressed a button on his desk. Send them in. The office door opened. Two men in tactical gear entered, positioning themselves on either side of Hayes. Neither wore any identifying insignia, but their bearing and equipment marked them as specialized operators. Behind them came Dr. Volkov, his clinical gaze assessing Hayes with detached interest. Master Chief Morgan Hayes, Volkov said, his accent more pronounced than during their previous meeting. Finally, we meet properly. I have studied your service record with great interest. Dr. Volkov, Hayes acknowledged, mentally calculating options, escape routes, potential weapons within reach. You are wondering if you can overcome my security personnel, Volkov observed with unsettling accuracy. Perhaps break that lamp for a weapon. Use the desk as cover. Make it to the door. He smiled thinly. Please don't. It would be unfortunate to damage such valuable genetic material. Genetic material. Hayes repeated. You have survived extensive combat exposure, multiple environments, biological and chemical agents during the Gulf War. Volkov's eyes gleamed with scientific interest. Your immune response profiles would provide valuable comparative data. Blackwood cleared his throat. What Dr. Volkov means, Hayes, is that you're too valuable to eliminate unnecessarily. He gestured to the guards. Take him to secure holding in the East Wing. Full isolation protocols. As the guards moved forward, Hayes made his decision. Fighting now against armed operators in a confined space would likely end with him dead or seriously injured. Better to comply, gather intelligence from inside their operation, and look for an opportunity with better odds. Colonel, he said as they secured his hands behind his back, whatever you think Granite Shield is, whatever they've told you about its purpose, you're being used. A flicker of something, doubt, regret, crossed Blackwood's face. We all serve in different ways, Master Chief. Sometimes the greatest patriotism requires the hardest choices. Patriotism? Hayes couldn't keep the disgust from his voice. Is that what you call experimenting on American citizens? Volkov stepped forward. You misunderstand the purpose of our work, Master Chief. We are not experimenting on citizens. We are securing America's future against emerging biological threats. His smile never reached his eyes. The limited civilian exposure is simply verification of our protective measures. As the guards led Hayes from the office, he locked eyes with Blackwood one last time. You signed off on Blackbriar, Colonel. 37 civilians. Collateral elimination necessities. Does Granite Shield use the same terminology? Blackwood's momentary shock confirmed that Hayes's reference had hit home. The document Alex had shown him was authentic. The guards escorted Hayes across the compound toward the East Wing, moving quickly but not roughly. Training and instinct kicked in as Hayes memorized their route, noted security camera positions, counted personnel, identified potential weaknesses in their protocols. The secure holding area had been established in what was previously a storage facility. Now it had been converted into a detention center with 6 individual cells. Hayes was the only occupant. They placed him in the center cell, removed his restraints, and left him alone without a word. The cell was small but not uncomfortable. A bed, toilet facilities, even a small desk bolted to the floor. No windows but ventilation ducts ensuring fresh air circulation. The door was solid steel with a small observation window. Hayes took stock of his situation. They had taken his watch, his belt, his shoes, standard procedure to reduce suicide or escape options. The cell contained no obvious surveillance devices, but he assumed he was being monitored. The most concerning element was the medical equipment visible in the adjoining room through the observation window. Collection vials, centrifuges, analytical equipment. Volkov's interest in his genetic material hadn't been merely conversational. Hours passed with no contact. A psychological tactic Hayes recognized. Isolation, uncertainty. Time to imagine worst-case scenarios. He countered it with the mental discipline forged through SEAL training and decades of operations. Meditation, physical exercise within the confines of the cell, systematic planning. At what he estimated to be around 1,800 hours, the door finally opened. A woman in a white lab coat entered, accompanied by 2 guards. She carried medical equipment, syringes, collection vials, monitoring devices. Master Chief Hayes, she said professionally, I'm Dr. Winters. I need to collect some baseline samples. Hayes remained seated on the bed. Under whose authority? Operation Granite Shield protocols. She began preparing a syringe. This won't take long if you cooperate. And if I don't, one of the guards stepped forward, hand moving to the taser at his belt. Dr. Winters sighed. Please don't make this difficult, Master Chief. The samples will be collected regardless. The only variable is how uncomfortable the process becomes for you. Hayes assessed his options. Fighting now would be premature. They were prepared, and the potential for gathering intelligence outweighed the temporary violation of having blood drawn. Fine, he said, extending his arm, but I want to know what you're testing for. Just standard baselines, Dr. Winters replied efficiently, finding a vein. Blood chemistry, immune markers, genetic sequencing. As she worked, Hayes studied her. Mid-40s, competent hands, the slightly distant professionalism of someone who had compartmentalized the ethical implications of her work. Yet beneath the clinical demeanor, he sensed something else. A trace of doubt, perhaps even reluctance. You're preparing for the release of PX-90. he said quietly, watching for her reaction. Her hands paused momentarily, just enough to confirm his statement had hit home. I don't know what you're talking about, she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. The community's downwind of Thunderhawk, Hayes continued. Have you calculated the casualty projections, the children who will be affected, or are they just acceptable collateral parameters to you? Dr. Winters completed her collection in silence, her earlier professional demeanor replaced with tense efficiency. As she prepared to leave, Hayes made one final attempt. Doctor, whatever they've told you about the purpose of Granite Shield, ask yourself this. Why the secrecy? Why use American communities as unwitting test subjects? If this was legitimate national defense, there are established protocols designated testing facilities. She paused at the door. Sometimes conventional channels are too slow, too compromised. Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Sometimes threats require immediate action. What threat justifies experimenting on our own citizens? Dr. Winters glanced at the guards, then back to Hayes. Her expression softened momentarily, revealing the conflict behind her professional facade. Phase 2, she said enigmatically, her eyes conveying more than her words. They've convinced themselves it's the only way. Then she was gone, the door closing firmly behind her. Hayes processed this new information. Phase 2, something beyond Granite Shield, something that apparently justified extreme measures in the minds of those involved. As night fell, he prepared for the 2,000 hours check-in with Alex that would never come. She would be expecting his communication, and when it didn't come, she would know something had gone wrong. The question was what she would do about it and whether she had enough information to act without him. The lights in the corridor outside his cell flickered briefly, a power fluctuation. Then again longer this time. Hayes sat up instantly alert. This wasn't random. The base had backup generators, surge protectors, stabilized power systems for critical infrastructure. The lights went out completely, plunging the detention area into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in, dim red bulbs casting eerie shadows across the corridor. Then came the sound Hayes had been waiting for, the distinct click of electronic locks disengaging as the security system reset. His cell door remained closed, but he knew it was no longer locked. Someone had triggered a systematic power failure, the kind that would affect electronic security while leaving communications and critical systems operational. Hayes moved to the door, listening intently. Voices in the corridor, guards responding to the situation, calling for status reports, receiving confusing and contradictory information judging by their responses. He waited, timing his move carefully. When the voices moved toward the main security station, Hayes gently pushed the door open and slipped into the dimly lit corridor. The emergency lighting worked to his advantage, creating deep shadows where he could conceal his movements. He moved silently toward the exit, years of training allowing him to navigate without making a sound. At the main security door, he paused. Two guards remained at their stations, speaking urgently into radios, distracted but still present. Getting past them without creating an alarm would be nearly impossible. Then the fire suppression system activated, sprayers dousing the entire area with water. Alarms blared, adding to the confusion. The guards, now soaking wet, cursed and moved away from their electronic equipment. Hayes seized the opportunity, slipping through the security door while they were distracted. The hallway beyond was chaos. Personnel rushing to secure equipment, respond to alarms, establish what was happening. Using the confusion as cover, Hayes made his way toward the rear exit of the East Wing. He needed to get clear of the building, find transportation, and rendezvous with Alex. As he rounded the corner toward the exit, he nearly collided with a familiar figure. Lieutenant Commander Mason, soaking wet and looking decidedly unlike someone responding to an emergency. Their eyes met in mutual recognition. Mason glanced around quickly, then jerked his head toward a side corridor. "This way," he whispered. 2 minutes until they realize you're gone." Hayes followed suspicion, warring with necessity. Mason led him through a maintenance access corridor, bypassing the main security checkpoints. "You did this," Hayes stated rather than asked as they hurried through the narrow passage. "Not alone," Mason replied grimly. "Williams helped with a diversion in the medical wing, and your friend outside handled the power systems." "My friend?" "The woman called Sentinel. She contacted me after you missed your check-in, said you'd been compromised." They emerged behind the motor pool building. A perimeter fence lay 20 yards ahead, beyond which the Montana forest offered cover and concealment. "Why are you helping?" Hayes asked, still not fully trusting this unexpected ally. Mason's expression hardened. Because I saw what they were preparing to release. Saw the deployment coordinates, all civilian areas. He checked his watch. Transport's waiting beyond the fence. You've got about 90 seconds before the backup security systems come online. Come with us, Hayes offered. We could use someone with access to the base. Mason shook his head. Can't, not yet. Williams and I can do more good from the inside. He pressed a small data drive into Hayes' hand. Everything we could download about Granite Shield. Deployment schedules, compound specifications, authorization chains. The facility's lights began to flicker back to life as the main power systems recovered. Go, Mason urged. We'll create additional confusion to cover your escape. Hayes gripped the younger officer's shoulder. Be careful. These people don't leave loose ends. Learn that from the best master, Chief. Mason managed a tight smile. Now move. Your guardian angel is waiting. Hayes sprinted for the fence, finding a pre-cut section that peeled back just enough for him to slip through. As he disappeared into the tree line, the base erupted with renewed activity. Alarms, floodlights, personnel rushing to response positions. He moved swiftly through the forest, following a small game trail that led away from the facility. After approximately half a mile, he spotted it. A dark figure waiting beside a camouflaged vehicle rifle at the ready. Alex lowered her weapon as he approached. Cutting it close, Master Chief. Had to wait for my invitation to leave, he replied, handing her the data drive. Courtesy of Mason and Williams. Everything on Granite Shield. Her eyes widened slightly. They helped you escape. Along with your handiwork on the power systems. Wasn't subtle, but it worked. He gestured to the vehicle. We need to move. They'll have patrols out within minutes. As they sped away from Thunderhawk, Hayes felt something he hadn't expected. The electric thrill of being back in the field on mission with a worthy partner at his side. For all his years of distinguished service, there was something different about this operation. A clarity of purpose that came from knowing exactly what was at stake. As they drove deeper into the Montana wilderness, Hayes filled her in on everything he'd learned. Volkov's involvement, the accelerated timeline, the mysterious reference to Phase 2. Thompson's been monitoring their communications, Alex said as they navigated the back roads. The power failure caused more damage than they anticipated. Several key systems were corrupted. They've delayed deployment by 24 hours to recover. So we have a little more time. A little? Her expression was grim in the dashboard light, but they've also called in reinforcements. Security is being doubled at all 4 facilities. They know someone is on to them. Hayes processed this. The data from Mason might give us what we need to shut down all 4 operations simultaneously. That's the hope. Alex glanced at him, concern evident in her face. What did they do to you in there? Blood samples, genetic testing. Volkov seemed particularly interested in my valuable genetic material. Something flickered across Alex's face, concern, perhaps even fear. That's not good, Hayes. Volkov doesn't take samples without a specific purpose in mind. They drove through the night, following unmarked roads that eventually gave way to barely visible tracks through dense forest. After 3 hours of careful navigation, they reached a small clearing dominated by what appeared to be an abandoned ranger station. The small wooden structure looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Windows boarded up, roof partially collapsed. Alex approached not the building itself, but a rusted metal container that might once have housed equipment. She entered a code on a concealed keypad, and the false front swung open to reveal a narrow staircase leading underground. Cold War-era listening post, she explained as they descended, converted by Thompson into a secure fallback position. The bunker below was surprisingly well equipped. Communications gear, weapons supplies, and, most importantly, a comprehensive security system monitoring the surrounding area. Thompson was waiting for them, his expression grim. You made it. Good. We're running out of time. He led them to his command center, an array of monitors displaying data streams, satellite imagery, and intercepted communications. I've analyzed the information from Thunderhawk, he said, pulling up schematics on the main screen. Granite Shield is far more advanced than we initially believed. The deployment is scheduled for all 4 facilities simultaneously at 0600 tomorrow morning. That's less than 24 hours from now, Hayes observed, studying the deployment timeline. They've accelerated the schedule because of your escape, Thompson confirmed. But there's more. He pulled up another file. I managed to access Dr. Volkov's personal files through a back door in the Thunderhawk server. What I found explains why they're willing to risk so much to carry out this operation. The screen displayed a classified document titled Demographic Recalibration Initiative, Phase 2 Overview. My God, Alex breathed as she scanned the contents. This isn't just a field test. It's a precursor to something much larger. Hayes read the document with growing horror. Phase 2, scheduled to begin 60 days after Granite Shield, involved the release of a more potent version of PX90 in 12 major population centers across the United States. The projected casualty figures were in the hundreds of thousands. They're calling it necessary demographic adjustment, Thompson said, disgust evident in his voice, targeting specific genetic markers common in certain ethnic and socioeconomic groups. This is genocide, Hayes stated flatly. Domestic genocide disguised as national security. And according to these files, it has approval from elements within multiple federal agencies, Thompson added. Though I doubt the authorization chain knows the full scope. Alex studied the deployment schematics for Granite Shield. We need to stop all 4 facilities simultaneously. If even one succeeds in releasing PX90, thousands will die. We're 3 people against 4 heavily guarded government facilities, Hayes pointed out. Even with Mason and Williams potentially helping at Thunderhawk, the odds are impossible. Not necessarily, Thompson interjected. These files contain something else. The command protocols for Granite Shield, including the emergency abort codes. He brought up another document displaying a series of alphanumeric sequences. Each facility has a unique abort code that can shut down the deployment system. And the problem is, he continued, the code must be entered locally at each facility's command terminal. It can't be done remotely. Hayes processed this information, tactical options automatically formulating in his mind. So we need teams at each location entering the abort codes simultaneously. And we have less than 24 hours to organize it, Alex added. Thompson smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. I may have a solution to that problem. He pressed a button on his communications panel. They're here. Send them in. A door at the far end of the bunker opened. 4 people entered, 3 men and 1 woman, all with the unmistakable bearing of military veterans. Hayes didn't recognize any of them, but Alex clearly did. Her composure slipped momentarily, genuine surprise flashing across her face. Captain Samuel Wilson. Thompson introduced the oldest of the group, a weathered man in his late 60s with the lean, hard look of career special forces. Retired Green Beret, served in every major conflict from Vietnam through Desert Storm. Wilson nodded to Hayes. Master Chief, your reputation precedes you. Thompson continued with the introductions. Major David Ramirez, former Delta Force. Lieutenant Lisa Mitchell, Naval Intelligence. And Chief Petty Officer James Carter, SEAL Team 3. Hayes assessed the group with a professional eye. All carried themselves with the quiet confidence of elite operators. All appeared to be in excellent physical condition, despite their age. What is this? He asked, looking to Thompson. The answer to our numbers problem, Thompson replied. Each of these individuals has a personal connection to Ghost Echo operations. Each has reason to trust Sentinel, and each has the skills we need for what comes next. Wilson stepped forward. December 18th, 2002, Kandahar Province. My team was pinned down. No extraction possible. Command had written us off. His eyes shifted to Alex. Then a voice came over the emergency channel. 7 impossible shots later, we all made it home alive. Ramirez spoke next. Mosul, 2007. Hostage rescue gone wrong. 4 of us trapped in a building surrounded by insurgents. Sentinel created an escape corridor with precision fire from over 1.5 kilometers away. One by one, they shared similar stories. Operations where all hope was lost until Ghost Echo intervened. Until Sentinel created a miracle through skill, courage, and the kind of precision shooting that defied conventional limits. I've spent the last 12 years building this network, Thompson explained. Veterans who owe their lives to Ghost Echo. People who understand that sometimes the greatest threats to America come from within. You knew this day would come, Hayes realized, looking at Alex. You've been preparing for it. Not specifically, she admitted, but I knew the committee wouldn't stop with Ghost Echo. Their ambitions were always larger than eliminating a few inconvenient operatives. Thompson returned to the command center console. Each team will deploy to one of the four Granite Shield facilities. Wilson to Fallbridge in Washington, Ramirez to Camp Williamson in Idaho, Mitchell and Carter to Black Rock Mountain in Wyoming. He looked at Hayes and Alex. You two take Thunderhawk. You have the inside knowledge. We'll need more than just abort codes, Hayes said, thinking through the tactical challenges. Security at all four facilities will be at maximum alert after my escape. Already addressed, Thompson replied, gesturing to a weapons cache along one wall. Equipment, credentials, tactical gear, everything you'll need for infiltration. We've been preparing contingencies for years. For the next several hours, they developed the operation plan. Thompson's intelligence on each facility was remarkably comprehensive. Security protocols, personnel rotations, building schematics, communications frequencies. The team studied the abort procedures in detail, memorizing the codes and the exact steps required to implement them. 36 hours ago, I was preparing for retirement, Hayes said quietly to Alex as they finalized their approach to Thunderhawk. Now I'm planning to infiltrate my own base. Alex looked at him, her expression softening slightly. Having second thoughts. Hayes shook his head. No, just wondering how many other operations I've been part of that weren't what they seemed. More than you'd want to know, she replied. Then after a pause, her voice dropped to a softer register. It's not too late to walk away from this, Hayes. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment they decided to test biological weapons on American civilians. His voice was calm but resolute. And maybe even before that. Sierra Nevada, 1991. I've been part of this longer than I knew. Alex studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Her hand moved briefly to his arm, a gesture of camaraderie that somehow felt more significant than mere professional respect. For what it's worth, I'm glad you're here, even though I nearly got you killed by leading those agents to your cabin. The ghost of a smile touched her lips. Nobody's perfect, Master Chief, not even legends. As dawn approached, the teams made final preparations. Equipment was checked, communications protocols established, timing synchronized. Hayes found himself examining the faces around him. Career soldiers, intelligence officers, operators from across the spectrum of American Special Forces, men and women who had spent decades serving their country, now preparing for what might be the most important mission of their lives, stopping a threat from within. The irony wasn't lost on him. After 38 years defending America from external enemies, his final operation would be against those who had corrupted the very institutions he had sworn to serve. But as he caught Alex's eye across the room, this woman who had saved his life 3 decades ago and had spent 14 years fighting this shadow war alone, Hayes knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. The road ahead was dangerous, perhaps impossible, but that had never stopped him before. Dawn painted the Montana mountains in shades of gold and amber. Hayes stood at the edge of the forest line, overlooking Thunderhawk, studying the base through high-powered binoculars. The facility buzzed with activity. Security teams visibly patrolling the perimeter, helicopter surveillance circling at regular intervals, searchlights sweeping the surrounding forest. They're on high alert, he observed as Alex established their position on a ridge overlooking the base. Full defensive posture, she agreed, assembling her rifle with practiced efficiency. Expected, but it works in our favor in one way. They're looking outward for threats, not inward. Hayes checked his encrypted communication device. Mason's last update confirmed that Volkov is conducting final preparation checks. Command center in the East Wing, heavily guarded. The abort terminal is in the same location. He studied the facility through the binoculars again. We'll need to reach it by 0545 at the latest to coordinate with the other teams. Alex finished her weapon preparations and settled into a prone firing position, the rifle braced perfectly despite the uneven terrain. The morning light caught her profile, and Hayes was struck by the focus in her expression, a singular determination born from years of operating alone in the shadows. This was not just another mission for her. This was the culmination of 14 years of hunting. I'll establish overwatch from here, she said. Clear your approach. Provide distraction if needed. Track Volkov's movements. Hayes checked his own equipment one final time. Sidearm combat knife, the small device containing the abort code's communications gear. What's your plan for Volkov? She adjusted her scope minutely. When the abort sequence is initiated, there will be confusion. Security protocols will focus on the command center. Volkov will attempt to secure his research and escape through the secondary exit on the east side. And you'll be waiting. Yes. No emotion in her voice, just cold certainty. Hayes hesitated. Alex, if this is about revenge for your family— It's not about revenge, she interrupted, but then paused, her voice softening slightly. Not anymore. It's about ensuring Phase 2 never happens. Volkov is the only one with complete knowledge of the PX90 formula. Without him, the committee loses years of research. It made tactical sense, but Hayes wasn't entirely convinced her motivations were that clinical. Still, he understood the drive that had kept her going all these years. Sometimes the line between personal vendetta and justified mission became impossibly thin. Stay on comms, he said, preparing to move out. If anything changes, I'll let you know. She glanced up from her scope, holding his gaze a moment longer than necessary. Hayes, be careful. These people don't take prisoners. Neither do SEALs. The ghost of a smile touched her lips, and in that moment, Hayes saw beyond the hardened operative to the woman who had carried this burden alone for so long. Then her expression shifted back to professional focus, and the moment passed. He moved out, descending from their position and approaching Thunderhawk from the north, using the forest cover to mask his advance. Years of training took over. Deliberate movement patterns, careful foot placement, constant environmental awareness. Despite his age, Matthew Hayes moved like the elite operator he had been for nearly 4 decades. As he neared the perimeter fence, he activated his communication device. Sentinel, this is Eagle. In position at northern approach. Status? Mason's voice came through low and tense. Eagle, this is Watchdog. Northeast checkpoint clear for the next 12 minutes. Security camera on rotation cycle. Window opens in 30 seconds. Copy that. Moving in. Hayes approached the fence at the exact coordinates Mason had provided. As promised, a section had been pre-cut, creating an opening just large enough to slip through. Beyond the fence lay 50 yards of exposed ground before reaching the maintenance access door Mason had left unlocked. Camera rotating now, Mason's voice advised. You have 40 seconds. Hayes moved, crossing the open ground in a controlled sprint that kept his profile low while covering ground efficiently. He reached the maintenance door with seconds to spare, slipping inside just as the security camera swung back toward his position. I'm in, he confirmed quietly, proceeding to the next phase. The maintenance corridor was dimly lit and unoccupied, used primarily for accessing utilities rather than regular foot traffic. Hayes navigated through the narrow passageway, following the memorized route toward the main building complex. Update on Volkov, he asked, pausing at a junction to check for patrols. Target is still in the command center. Alex's voice came through clearly. East wing, second floor. 4 security personnel visible. Copy that. Proceeding to rendezvous point. Hayes continued through the facility, avoiding the main corridors where security would be heaviest. Twice he had to duck into alcoves as patrols passed, their heightened alertness evident in their movements and positioning. He reached the designated meeting point, a utility room near the central hub, at exactly 0438 hours. 2 minutes later, the door opened and Captain Williams entered, her medical coat concealing a security badge with higher clearance than her position would normally warrant. Master Chief, she greeted him tersely. Situation has changed. They've moved up the timeline. Deployment is now scheduled for 0500. Hayes processed this. That gives us just over 20 minutes. What about the other facilities? Thompson has alerted the other teams, Williams confirmed. But there's another problem. They've isolated the command center network. The abort terminal is now on a closed system requiring dual authentication, meaning you'll need both an authorized fingerprint and a command code to access the abort function. She handed him a small device. This will spoof Blackwood's biometrics, but you'll still need someone with command authority physically present. Hayes considered this complication. Where's Mason? Reassigned to perimeter duty after they became suspicious of his activities. He can't help us. Williams checked her watch. I need to get back before they notice I'm missing. Commander's office, east wing, third door on the right from the main stairwell. The abort terminal is disguised as an emergency response system. As she turned to leave, Hayes asked, Why are you helping us, Doctor? You're risking everything. She paused, her expression hardening. Because I joined the Navy to save lives, not take them. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. and because I've seen Volkov's casualty projections for Phase 2. My family lives in one of the target zones. After Williams departed, Hayes relayed the new information to Alex. This complicates things. Without Mason or someone else with command authority, I can't activate the abort sequence. I'll figure something out. What's your position? Established on the East Ridge, clear line of sight to Volkov's expected exit route. A pause. Hayes, if you can't reach the abort terminal in time, I'll reach it, he interrupted. Focus on your target. Maintain radio discipline from here on. Hayes continued his infiltration, moving deeper into the facility. The increased security was evident everywhere. Additional guards, enhanced surveillance, restricted movement protocols. This wasn't just about his escape anymore. The accelerated timeline suggested the committee was genuinely concerned about their operation being compromised. As he approached the East Wing, Hayes encountered a new obstacle, a security checkpoint that hadn't been in the original schematics. Two guards stood at attention, checking credentials of everyone entering the secure area. He retreated to a side corridor, considering options. Direct confrontation would trigger alarms. Circumvention would cost precious time. He needed a diversion. The solution came in the form of a fire alarm pull station 20 feet away. Simple but effective. Hayes waited until the corridor was momentarily clear, then activated the alarm. The effect was immediate. Klaxons blared throughout the facility. Emergency protocols kicked in with security personnel responding to the potential threat. In the confusion, Hayes slipped past the checkpoint using Williams's borrowed ID to access the secure wing. He located the commander's office exactly where Williams had described it. The door was locked, but the security bypass device she'd provided granted him access. Inside the office was dark and unoccupied. Hayes located the emergency response system, a wall-mounted console that looked like standard emergency equipment but contained the abort interface for Granite Shield. As Williams had warned, the system required dual authentication, both biometric verification and command authorization codes. The biometric spoofer would handle the first requirement, but without someone of appropriate rank physically present, the system would remain locked. Hayes checked his watch. 448 hours. The deployment was scheduled for 0500. Other teams would be moving into position at their respective facilities, counting on Thunderhawk to complete its part of the mission. He activated his communication device. Sentinel, this is Eagle. Terminal located, but access requires command authority. Mason is unavailable, requesting options. Long seconds passed before Alex's voice came back. There's only one option, Blackwood. He's the last person who would help us. Not voluntarily, she acknowledged, but he's the only one with both the physical access and the command codes needed. Hayes considered this. Where is he now? Command center with Volkov. But he routinely checks the preparation status in the deployment bay. According to the schedule Thompson intercepted, he should make his final inspection at 0450. That gives me 2 minutes to intercept him. The route from command to the deployment bay passes through the east corridor, 50 meters from my current position. It's our only play, Hayes. The other teams are counting on us. Hayes acknowledged the reality of their situation. I'll intercept Blackwood and bring him to the abort terminal. Be ready for your part. Always am. Hayes exited the office and positioned himself along Blackwood's expected route, finding a maintenance alcove that offered concealment while providing a clear view of the corridor. Then he waited the disciplined patience of a career operator, allowing him to remain perfectly still despite the tension of the moment. At precisely 0450, footsteps approached. Colonel William Blackwood appeared, moving briskly down the corridor, accompanied by a single security officer. Both men were focused on their conversation, discussing final preparations for the deployment. Hayes allowed them to pass his position, then emerged silently behind them. He neutralized the security officer first, a precise strike to the base of the skull that rendered the man unconscious without a sound. Before Blackwood could react, Hayes had him in a control hold, a combat knife pressed against his throat. Not a word, Colonel, he whispered. One sound and this ends badly for you. Blackwood froze, recognizing the voice. Hayes, you're making a terrible mistake. The only mistake was believing men like you understood the oath you took. Hayes directed him toward the commander's office. Move slowly. Inside the office, Hayes secured the door, and forced Blackwood into a chair. The colonel's expression remained defiant despite his precarious position. "Whatever you think you know, Hayes, you're wrong," Blackwood said. "Granite Shield is a necessary operation critical to national security. Experimenting on American citizens without their knowledge or consent is necessary," Hayes challenged. "Targeting specific demographic groups for elimination is national security. You don't understand the bigger picture, the threats we're facing." "I understand perfectly." Hayes activated the abort terminal. "You're going to enter your command authorization and abort Granite Shield now." Blackwood's expression hardened. "I will do no such thing. Kill me if you want, but Granite Shield will proceed. The other facilities will complete their deployments, even if Thunderhawk fails." "All 4 facilities will abort simultaneously," Hayes informed him. "Unless you want to be remembered as the man responsible for the largest loss of American civilian life on U.S. soil, you'll enter those codes." Uncertainty flickered across Blackwood's face. "All 4? That's impossible. You couldn't have compromised all the facilities." "Ghost Echo has more allies than you realize, Colonel. Veterans who remember what service really means." Hayes checked his watch. 0452 hours. Time was running out. "Make your choice." Blackwood studied him, measuring the truth of his words. "If what you're saying about Phase 2 is true, if the committee is really planning what you claim, the authorization didn't come through normal channels. Many of us were told this was a limited test of defensive countermeasures." "You saw the casualty projections," Hayes pressed. "The targeting parameters. Deep down, you knew what this really was." A long moment of silence passed as the internal struggle played out across Blackwood's features. Hayes could see the conflict in the older officer's eyes. Duty versus conscience, orders versus ethics. He recognized it because he'd felt the same struggle himself just days ago. Finally, resignation replaced defiance. "The military exists to protect American citizens, not experiment on them," Blackwood said quietly. "Whatever the committee's justifications, this crosses a line no soldier should accept." He moved to the terminal and placed his hand on the biometric scanner. The system recognized his authorization, unlocking the command interface. Blackwood entered his codes, then stepped back. "Abort sequence requires confirmation," he said. "Final authorization code needed." Hayes entered the alphanumeric sequence Thompson had provided. The terminal processed for several seconds, then displayed "Abort sequence initiated. Confirmation required from primary deployment sites." "It's working," Hayes said into his communication device. "Thunderhawk abort sequence confirmed, awaiting other sites." One by one, confirmations came in from the other teams. Fallbridge reporting abort confirmation. Camp Williamson abort sequence confirmed. Blackrock Mountain confirming abort. The terminal updated. All sites confirmed. Granite Shield operation aborted. Containment protocols activated. Throughout the facility, alarms began to sound. Not the standard security alert, but the distinctive pattern indicating a critical system shutdown. Emergency protocols would be activating, securing the PX-90 compound and preventing its deployment. "It's done," Hayes said, relief evident in his voice. "All sites confirmed abort." "Not quite done." Alex's voice came back, tension evident. "Volkov is on the move. Emergency exit East Wing, just as predicted. He's carrying a secure case, likely contains research data and possibly samples." Hayes looked at Blackwood. "Is there a secondary deployment option, a backup plan if the primary system fails?" Blackwood's expression confirmed his suspicion. Volkov insisted on contingency measures. A portable delivery system, small scale but effective within a limited radius. He's going to attempt a manual deployment, Hayes realized. Alex Volkov has a backup delivery system. Portable device. Understood. I have him in my sights. Hayes secured Blackwood to a chair. "When this is over, Colonel, you'll have to answer for your part in all this. But what you did just now, aborting Granite Shield, that counts for something." "The committee won't stop," Blackwood warned. "This is just one operation. They have others in various stages of development." "Then we'll stop those too," Hayes replied, heading for the door. "One operation at a time." Outside, chaos had engulfed Thunderhawk. The abort sequence had triggered emergency protocols throughout the facility. Security personnel were focused on securing the primary deployment systems, creating the perfect distraction for Hayes to make his way toward the east exit where Volkov was headed. He moved quickly through the quarters, avoiding direct confrontation where possible, neutralizing resistance when necessary. Years of operational experience guided his movements, efficient, precise, with no wasted motion or hesitation. As he approached the east exit, Hayes heard gunfire ahead, sharp cracks of precision, rifle shots coming from outside the facility. Alex had engaged. Hayes rounded the final corner to find a scene of tactical precision. Two security personnel lay motionless near the exit door, each taken down by a single shot from Alex's position on the ridge. Dr. Alexei Volkov stood frozen in the doorway, a metal case clutched in one hand, a pistol in the other. "Don't move, doctor." Hayes ordered his own weapon trained on the scientist. Volkov turned slowly, his clinical detachment replaced by barely controlled panic. "Master Chief Hayes, you don't understand what you're interfering with." "I understand perfectly. PX90, targeted genetic markers, Phase 2. Hayes kept his weapon steady. "It ends here." "It's already too late," Volkov replied, a hint of his Russian accent emerging under stress. "The research exists. The formulas are documented. The committee will simply rebuild elsewhere." "Not without you, they won't," Hayes countered. "You're the key to their operation. The irreplaceable asset." A cold smile spread across Volkov's face. "Then you understand why I cannot allow myself to be captured." His hand moved toward the case. "This contains more than research. It contains my insurance policy." "Stop," Hayes commanded. "Hands where I can see them. Or what you'll shoot me." Volkov's smile widened, a glint of madness in his eyes. "Then you risk damaging this case, which contains, among other things, a pressurized canister of PX90. Primitive delivery system, but effective within 50 meters. Hayes kept his weapon trained on the scientist assessing options. Shooting Volkov might trigger the release. Attempting to rush him would create the same risk. A standoff neither of them could afford. "That would kill you too," Hayes pointed out. "A scientist's final experiment," Volkov replied with disturbing calm. "Data collection to the very end." The standoff held for long seconds, neither man moving. Hayes could see Volkov's finger tightening on the latch of the case. He was actually going to do it. Release the pathogen in a final act of defiance. Then a single shot rang out from the ridge. Volkov's hand exploded in a spray of red as the bullet struck with surgical precision, separating him from the case without damaging it. The impact was so perfectly calculated that it severed his grip without endangering the container. The scientist screamed in pain and shock, crumpling to his knees. The case clattered to the floor intact, but no longer in his possession. Hayes moved quickly, securing the case while keeping his weapon on Volkov. "Impressive shot," he commented into his communication device. "Hand's an easy target," Alex replied, a hint of professional pride in her voice. "Especially when you know exactly where to aim." Hayes secured Volkov with zip ties, ignoring the scientist's continued screams and threats. A quick inspection confirmed the case contained what appeared to be research documents, computer drives, and a small metal canister labeled PX90. "Package secured," he reported. "Extraction route." "South perimeter," Alex responded. "Thompson's team is standing by. 2-minute ETA." As if on cue, the sound of approaching vehicles reached them. Not the orderly approach of military transport, but the aggressive arrival of tactical teams. Through the open doorway, Hayes could see Thompson's extraction team deploying at the perimeter, engaging the facility's security forces to create an extraction corridor. "Time to go, doctor," Hayes said, hauling Volkov to his feet. "You have an appointment with some very interested senators." "You think this changes anything?" Volkov snarled, blood still flowing from his shattered hand. "The committee has contingencies for contingencies. They'll disavow everything. Classify it. Bury it so deep no one will ever find the truth." "Maybe once," Hayes acknowledged, "but not anymore. Not with what we've gathered. Not with you as a witness." Hayes activated his communication device one final time. "Sentinel package secured and moving to extraction point. Cover our exit." "Already am," came Alex's calm reply. "Always do." As Hayes moved Volkov toward the extraction point, the scientist continued his threats and warnings. But for the first time, Hayes detected something new in the man's voice: fear. Not of capture or punishment, but of exposure. Of having his life's work revealed to the world for what it truly was. The extraction unfolded with precision. Thompson's team created a secure corridor through the facility's perimeter defenses. The case containing Volkov's research was transferred to a specialized containment unit and Volkov himself, still ranting about the committee's reach and power, was secured in a transport vehicle. As they prepared to depart, Hayes scanned the ridge where Alex had established her overwatch position. No sign of her, but he hadn't expected one. Sentinel operated from the shadows, visible only when she chose to be. Hayes joined Thompson in the lead vehicle as they pulled away from Thunderhawk. Behind them, the facility had descended into chaos. The aborted Granite Shield operation, the compromised security, the missing research, all creating a perfect storm of confusion that would take hours to sort out. The other teams, Hayes asked as they sped away. All safely extracted, Thompson confirmed. Mission accomplished at all 4 sites. Granite Shield has been completely neutralized, and the evidence is being compiled as we speak. Senator Harris will receive everything within 24 hours. Operational details, research documentation, Volkov's testimony if we can secure it, and most importantly, the list of committee members involved in authorizing the operation. Hayes nodded, the weight of the past several days finally catching up with him. What happens now? Now, Thompson glanced at him. We prepare for their response. The committee won't take this lying down. They'll attempt to discredit the evidence, silence witnesses, maintain deniability. But they've never faced exposure on this scale before, Hayes observed. No, they haven't, Thompson agreed. That's what gives us a fighting chance. That and the people willing to stand against them. People like you, Hayes. An hour later at the rendezvous point, Hayes finally spotted Alex again. She approached his vehicle, her rifle case slung over her shoulder, her movements exhibiting the same fluid efficiency he'd first noticed at Thunderhawk. You cut it close with Volkov, he said as she joined him. Had to make sure he didn't damage the case. She glanced at where the scientist sat, secured and sedated in one of the transport vehicles. He would have released it, you know. He believes in his work that much. True believers are always the most dangerous, Hayes replied. They don't see people, just ideals. Alex's eyes found his, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Like we used to be before we saw behind the curtain. Hayes considered this. Maybe. Difference is we woke up. Men like Volkov never do. A congressional hearing convened behind closed doors. Senator Katherine Harris presided over a special subcommittee investigating what the press had termed unauthorized intelligence operations on domestic soil. Dr. Alexei Volkov testified for 9 consecutive days, his testimony filling thousands of pages with details of the committee's operations, research programs, and long-term objectives. Portions deemed safe for public consumption sent shockwaves through the American consciousness, revelations of authorized operations that violated fundamental constitutional principles in international law. 12 high-ranking officials across multiple agencies were indicted, 27 resigned, dozens more were placed under investigation, and deep within the government, the committee regrouped, adapted, evolved. Their most visible members sacrificed as necessary casualties, while the core leadership retreated further into the shadows to rebuild. In a small diner in rural Montana, 2 figures sat in a corner booth studying documents spread across the table between them. One, a distinguished older man with the bearing of career military. The other, a slim woman with chestnut hair and ever-present sunglasses. They're resuming operations in South America, Hayes said quietly, indicating a series of intelligence reports. New facilities, new personnel, same objectives. Alex nodded, unsurprised. The committee was never just about individuals. It's an ideology, a belief that certain people have the right to shape humanity's future according to their vision. So we start again, Hayes concluded, gathering the documents. Track their movements, identify their operations, expose them when we can, disrupt them when we can't. It never ends. Alex agreed, her expression resolute despite the exhaustion evident in her posture. But neither do we. Outside the diner, Thompson waited in a nondescript vehicle. Beyond him, barely visible in the distance, other vehicles were positioned strategically, each containing operators from what the intelligence community had begun calling the Ghost Network. Veterans who had chosen to continue their service in a different way, who had recognized that sometimes the most patriotic act was to question those in power. As they prepared to depart, Hayes paused, looking back at the woman who had changed the course of his life with a single impossible shot 3 decades earlier. Why did you do it? He asked, a question that had lingered since that first night in her cabin. All those years hunting the committee alone. You could have disappeared, built a new life somewhere. Alex removed her sunglasses, her gray eyes meeting his directly. Because someone needs to watch the watchers. Someone needs to stand in the shadows so others can walk in the light. A faint smile touched her lips. And because I made a promise long ago to my father and brother. What promise that I would use whatever talents I had to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She replaced her sunglasses. That's what sentinels do, Hayes. We stand guard, we keep watch. We protect the perimeter. Hayes nodded understanding. And now we continue. She studied him, her expression softening slightly. Unless you'd still prefer that retirement. Retirement can wait, Hayes replied. I think I've found a better use for my skills. Something shifted in Alex's demeanor, a subtle relaxing of the perpetual vigilance she carried like armor. I'm glad to hear it. This work, it's easier when you're not alone. It was the closest she'd come to admitting how isolating her 14-year crusade had been. Hayes recognized the significance of the admission. Partners then, he asked. Partners, she agreed with the ghost of a real smile. As they walked toward the waiting vehicles, toward whatever mission came next in their endless vigil, Hayes understood with perfect clarity what had driven this remarkable woman for so many years. Not revenge, though that had played its part. Not redemption, though that too had motivated her actions. But duty, the most fundamental obligation of those with the power to act, to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them, to defend principles larger than any individual or agency, to remember always what service truly meant. In the distance, thunder rumbled across the Montana sky. A storm was coming. But for those caught in its path, guardians stood ready, watchers on the wall, sentinels in the shadows. And among them, still vigilant, after all these years, the legend whose impossible shots had saved so many, Alexandra Alex Caldwell, call sign Sentinel. And now by her side, a new partner who understood her mission because he shared it. Matthew Hayes, who had traded retirement for something far more meaningful, protecting his country, not just from enemies without, but from those within. The committee's planning something big in Bogota, Alex said, as they reached the vehicles already focused on the next mission. Thompson's contacts have identified unusual activity at a research facility there. Then I guess we're going to Colombia, Hayes replied, settling into the rhythm of this new chapter in his life. For 30 years, Hayes had wondered who had saved his team in the mountains of Sierra Nevada. Now he knew, and more importantly, he had found a new purpose for the years ahead. Not retirement, not a quiet fade into civilian life, but a continued mission alongside the guardian angel who had once saved him from the shadows. The greatest threats to America, he had learned, didn't always come from foreign enemies. Sometimes they came from within, from those who had lost sight of what they were sworn to protect. And in those shadows where oversight failed and accountability vanished, someone needed to stand watch. Someone needed to be the guardian no one saw coming. Someone like Sentinel. And now, someone like him.